Hello? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, this is Mariana.
Check.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today.
Mic check.
And apologies for the delay, but there were a couple of technical things that we tried to fix because one of our panelists is connected from California, so we tried to fix that. And I hope that running the panel in English is going to be fine for most of you, because unfortunately there's no translation from English to Italian. Per gli italiani in sala che non parlano inglese, spero che non sia, almeno mi rammarico che non ci sia la traduzione dall'inglese all'italiano, che non è prevista per questo panel, e ci scusiamo per questo breve ritardo, ma abbiamo dovuto risolvere cose tecniche con il nostro ospite connesso dalla California. Okay, so good afternoon again, and thank you for joining us today. Before we get started with our panelists, I will briefly introduce myself. I'm a geographer by education and a journalist by profession, and I usually tell stories in a visual way by making data visible for The Guardian and The Observer in London. I'm also here to represent CILD, the Italian Coalition for Civil Freedoms and Rights. As you can understand, my work is actually at one of the crossing points between journalism and activism. And I'll do my best today to moderate this fascinating, for me, panel, even though moderation could be quite an achievement if you introduce a panel defined by the word radical. But we use this expression, radical data, in a sort of provocative way to define an area of the current mediascape where quality journalism and activism seem to converge, mostly thanks to the bridging role played by data-based visual storytelling. So we are here to understand if this is really happening, whether in an harmonious or in a clashing, messy way, and why. And we will try to do so with the contribution of some of the leading voices involved in the field. So we are glad and honored to be joined today by Aaron Pilofer, who is the executive editor of digital at The Guardian. Gabi Sobli, who is senior... Gabi, where are you? Over there. Gabi is senior coordinator of Exposing the Invisible, a tactical technology collective in Berlin. Guido Romeo, here on the right, is data and business editor of the Wired Italian edition, and is also co-founder of Diritto di Sapere. It is a no-profit project advocating an Italian Freedom of Information Act. In the middle, we have Costanza Hermanin, who is Senior Policy Officer at the Open Society European Policy Institute in Brussels, where she deals with migration and equality. And from California, hopefully, we are joined by Mariana Santos. Mariana, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hello, everybody.
Excellent. We should be able, to see you on the screen. Mariana is a Knight Fellow at Stanford and Director of Interactive and Animation at Fusion, that is a multi-platform media company joint venture between the Disney ABC television group and Univision, if I'm correct. Cool.
You are correct.
Fantastic. And Mariana started also Chicas Poderosas, a movement aimed to train and inspire and involve more women in technological newsroom. So special thanks to Mariana for joining us, because I know that it's 5 a.m. in California and you flew from Florida a few hours ago. So I must also say that having you by Skype is like keeping a tiger in a cage, because your live presence in the room is always very energetic and disruptive, but I'm sure that we will feel some of your energy anyway.
Thank you so much, Julia.
Okay, thank you for being here. So thank you everybody for being here. And I just wanted to start thinking about what we experienced, most of us, yesterday with the panel that CILD organized around Snowden. And we have to say that Edward Snowden handed over to Guardian journalists the responsibility of publishing the data he leaked. And he said, quote, "Honestly, I don't want to be the person making the decisions on what should be public and what shouldn't, which is why rather than publishing these on my own or putting them out openly, I'm running them through journalists." So he didn't basically reach out for the most important NGOs, but it is the Guardian. And yesterday, it was noticed that journalism is one of the most effective, if not the only, leverage we still have. So I would like to start our debate running a question through the panel, and I would like to have the answer of our panelists. And the question is, what does this tell us about the role of quality journalism and about the relationship between journalism and activism? Shall we start from here?
Go.
I get to play the Chico Poderoso here? Okay. Well, thank you for having me, first of all, especially with all these heavyweights and in journalism from Guardian and New York Times. I'm talking about Aaron and not yourself. But anyway, I'm not really comfortable with what Snowden said yesterday about journalists. I think he's great. He did something incredible. He's the best, the biggest scoop of the last probably 10, 20 years. But I don't think that journalists are doing all of it. I think that there are a lot of NGOs that are doing a great job. There was a panel yesterday here in Perugia from Dan Gilmer, and he was, I will actually quote him a lot today because he has said a couple of things that are really relevant for our discussion. And he really pointed to a lot of NGOs that are doing very important work. And this is essential for the work of journalists because with the exception of outlets like Guardian, New York Times, and other big heavyweights, newsrooms are more and more like our newsroom, which is less than 20 people, and it's more and more freelancers. So it's having people out there in the field is something that we cannot afford. So I think he made the right decision in the end. I mean, evidence shows that he had impact, and history will judge this, but I don't think it's fair to say that journalists are the only way to go about this.
Okay, Constance, would you like to keep on answering? And then maybe we can hear the point of view of Aaron and Gab. Thanks.
So, thank you, Giulio, and thanks to the Italian Civil Liberties Coalition for organizing this amazing panel. I share Guido's point of view, and just let me give you an example. Quality data given to journalists, it's a very good idea, but it also depends upon the journalist, and sometimes you need to have some intermediation. So on themes like accountability, transparency, surveillance, privacy, okay, journalists are very much on the topic, at least over the past few years, a little bit less in Italy, a little bit more in Anglo-Saxon countries, but on themes like those on which I work, which are migration and equality, journalists are not on top of it. If you read Italian papers during the last week, we had an absolute emergency call from all the main Italian newspapers about the fact that allegedly Muslim migrants threw off a boat 12 Christian migrants. This on Thursday was on every single newspaper and homepage of major newspaper in Italy. 12 people, a story, interesting story, a little bit, I have to say, a little bit, an emergency story, a little bit worrying. We don't know to what extent it was true. 2 days earlier, 400 people, 400, died off the Libyan coast. It was nowhere in the Italian press. It was maybe at the very, very bottom of La Stampa, La Repubblica, etc., but at the very, very bottom. Now, 400 deaths on Tuesday, last Tuesday, is more than Lampedusa, October 3, 2013. So, there we need the mediation of some good activists in order to inform journalists that can do quality journalism by conveying this information a little bit better and not only exploiting the fact that we are all terrified about Muslims traveling through boats to Europe.
Right. Aaron, what's your take on this?
So this issue kind of came up, I would say, most directly for us during WikiLeaks, and I was at another news organization at the time, And, you know, we ended up making the decision, we had all the data. It was widely reported that these were documents. They were not. It was a database, essentially. And we chose to deliberately not publish more than a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of it. And what we did publish, we published heavily redacted. And I have to say, as a journalist, sitting there looking at a newsworthy document or database and spending my time redacting it feels weird. Feels really, really weird. And we took a lot of criticism for that. And I don't, to be honest with you, I don't know where I stand on it. At the time, I probably would have said it was responsible, because I don't think the test of whether or not revealing names of innocent people, putting people in danger, I don't think the test of whether that was the right decision is whether or not anybody was ultimately killed. I think that should not be the test. But I also feel strange in a position when I'm fighting every single day for data and documents with government officials whose job it is to give me this, who are telling me I can't have it, to then be in a position of telling the public, oh no, you can't have it because, you know, it would be irresponsible, or, you know, you can't handle the truth, to quote Jack Nicholson. You know, I don't know how that, I don't know where that kind of sits. And I think that that's an area that I'm glad we're having this panel for that exact reason, because I'm not sure we've quite thought that one entirely through.
Thank you.
Hi. So I work for an NGO that we primarily do capacity building for activists around the world, and there's usually a blurred line between what an activist is and what a journalist is. But I think that a journalist has a key platform that activists would often want to utilize. And in the same way that journalists, like Constanza was saying, there's a need for documentation, there's a need for monitoring, and sometimes that's not happening. And there was a project that was showcased here called the Migrant Files that realized that there was no information about migrant deaths in Europe, and then had a pan-European group to find this data, to publish this data, and then to report on this data. And those journalists, for me, were taking a more activist role. So I think the role between them have become quite indistinguishable in some circles. I think also there's a privacy concern. One of the thoughts is, did Edward Snowden contact The Guardian because they had better awareness of encryption and ability to contact each other with privacy-enhancing capabilities? And I think NGOs and activists are really starting to catch up and feel the need to be able to communicate with people safely and to protect themselves and protect others. But there's a big gap between both journalists and activists on using these privacy-enhancing tools.
Right, thank you, Gabby. Mariana, I would like to extend the question to you if you're still there. And
Yes, I'm still here.
Because
Can you hear me?
Yeah, of course. And from what I got, I think you might have a different perspective on this, and you can, I think, answer the question and maybe start describing some of the project that you're dealing with now.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for having me, and I'm sorry I'm not there physically because my fellowship demanded me that I'm here today. So regarding this story, I think is not, I would agree with Guido that is not talking just about journalism and activism, is rather having this trick to me of NGO journalism and activism. And of course, NGOs, each of them have their own agenda the same way that journalists and newspapers have their own agenda. That's why sometimes some stories are covered and others are not. Coming from The Guardian, I was in a place that I didn't make these decisions. I was just visualizing the stories that the superior editorial team would want to show to people. But basically, now at Fusion, it's totally different story. First of all, it's a startup. It's not a legacy, and it's digital first, digital only, and our main reason to exist is to give voice to these activists, to these underrepresented minorities, immigration in the USA, LGBT, Hispanic society, women. It's very, very broad agenda. So we definitely count on activists. Our own journalists become activists like Tim Pool. He goes on in the field, in the revolutions, and puts his life at the mercy of what's happening, because he thinks, and we think, it's very important that stories are reported in first hand. So having activists in the field, it's really like having an extra tool. Then what happens is that we are given the information, and then it's up to us, media, to publish this information or not, as Aaron was so well describing. And open data activists, for instance, these people are extremely important for us, especially in Latin America, where making the information available and open to the public is crucial. And it's a story that, it's a little bit behind what is happening in Europe. So we definitely count on these people to make the moves that we couldn't otherwise, as a small startup, do it. So the lines between activism and journalism here are really the information providers and let's say, I would say that my team is kind of the ones who massage that information and try to transform those data sets into information that users can understand and read and spread the information in a consumable way.
Okay, and so what is the role of activism in the journalistic work that you do at Fusion? And can we try to experiment with your, with this parallel presentation that I ran some slides that you can just in order to make the conversation more concrete and focus on some examples, that is always good in order to avoid the abstract reflection and stuff like that.
Okay, so can you show my presentation?
Yes, I think the guy over there can do it. Let's see.
Okay, maybe if you can jump to slide number 12 immediately, because then we go direct to the point.
Number 12.
Yes.
Okay, let's try to see if we can show something.
I love this analog style.
Well, I said earlier that you would have been disruptive. Okay, cool. So number, okay.
12, please. So I was going to talk about...
Tell me stop. It's this is your team? Okay. Number 12.
Yeah. This is a project we did about different activism revolutions, and we put up a Rise Up event in Washington, D.C., calling up lots of people in power to talk about this. But I would like to go to the next project, which is really meaningful about what we are talking here right now. Okay. Yeah, Stop Telling Women to Smile. So this project... So we care a lot about female issues, and especially street harassment, which is not less important in the US as it is in Latin America, and we really focus on that part of the world, especially because the situation there is another level of complexity. So if we can go to the next slide and open it in the website, in the link I gave you.
Yes, we can launch the link.
Okay, don't launch the video yet.
Not yet.
I just want to explain what happened. So we tried to use as well art and visual storytelling in order to bring these topics to the surfer and call attention to the wide public. So what we've done is, this is 75 stories of different women that we picked. Tatiana, which is an artist from Brooklyn. She would take a picture of a woman, then draw her, and then write the sentence that she would listen every day and all day, all the time, every day, and she would white paste it in the walls of Brooklyn. This project was brought by Fusion, by Anna Holmes, to Mexico City, where female street harassment is really, really dangerous and puts women in a situation where they can no longer defend. Just so you know, in Mexico City, there are buses for women and buses for men, the same way there are underground. There are wagons that are just for women, and if a man goes there, the women would exploit him and make him go out of the wagon, because there's rapes, there's all these kind of atrocities against women and crimes against women. They murder pregnant women, etc. If you scroll down, I just want you to give a sense of what activism can actually bring stories. It's the very last movie, so if you scroll down the page, please. You just scroll down that same page, but at the end.
La stessa pagina alla fine del sito? Perfetto.
Exactly. So this is all explaining the process and the creative process, and then mapping up where we wet pasted the projects. And then if you go down, 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 yes, here in this video, a little bit up, yes. This is a video that will give you a clear picture of what women suffer in Mexico City, and it has sound.
Hoy ya no vas a pararme. Ya basta de su violencia. Siento pena por ti. Yo soy dueña de mi cuerpo.
No sé si le diría algo, solo me gustaría que pensara en su madre o en su hermana o en cualquier mujer de su familia.
¿No te tengo miedo?
Pues que qué poco valor civil.
¿Qué te pasa, pendejo?
Porque me amo y me respeto, no te permito que me trates así.
Que se las mame a su madre, ¿no?
¿Quién te da derecho a hostigarme? No me importa lo que quieras decir de mi cuerpo.
Creo que nadie tiene derecho a decirte eso. Respétame.
Tu verga no me sirve para nada.
Eso fue para mí un acoso fuerte. Tengo derecho a caminar segura, no te permito que me violentes.
No estés jodiendo, no me molestes.
Cada vez que me lo dices y cada vez que me ves así, soy tu hija, soy tu mamá, soy tu hermana.
Oh, excellent. Looking at this, I have a question for you, Mariana, actually, because some people in the public might wonder if they got to the wrong panel, because we talk about data-based narratives, but I know that in this case the data was like the trigger of the project, because you realize, you look at the stats where, you know, the stats that depict where basically the phenomenon, this kind of phenomenon was particularly heavy and was a big problem, and you find out that the place was Mexico. So the data can be also just a trigger, right? It doesn't need to be data hardcore technology, data visualization, dense of database, you know, very complex things. It just can be just a clue that you, from where you start, basically.
Exactly. So this project started in Brooklyn, and then data shows that where in other countries there are like street female harassment in high levels, and that was Mexico to begin with. This project will now project all over across Latin America and Egypt and South Africa, because it has brought attention to the public. And data is not only numbers and times of the day and murders, is as well footage. This is an interview of 75 women, 75 stories. This is data as well. And we try to use the narrative, the journalism, visual storytelling skills to tell these stories, which are data as well. So yeah, not only numbers and charts and pies, other forms of data visualization start to come to the surface to tell this.
Exactly. And Aaron, about project, I have a question for you. And some of the most important revelation by The Guardian in recent years were basically about some important human and civil rights issues like surveillance, privacy, war, financial crimes, and were mostly spread by carefully designed, we could say almost engineered project, and where narrative basically, visual narrative was very important, and they included so many elements of visual storytelling. And why is this happening, and what is the role of data and the digital in this kind of evolution, if there is an evolution? What's the role of data and the digital in this kind of evolution?
Yeah, so, I mean, just to go way back to the prehistory of data and journalism, you know, this has been a continuum that started in the States anyway, in the late 60s, actually. And so journalists have been using data to tell stories, you know, forever. Back to the years when, you know, Phil Meyer was using punch cards to prove what we believed about the riots in Detroit was completely wrong. All the way through, you know, another project that actually Mariana worked on, where, you know, The Guardian used Twitter data to show that all the assumptions we had about, well, many of the assumptions we had about how rumors started about, that the zoo animals were being let out and all this crazy stuff, and how Twitter was blamed as the source of a lot of these problems and of the riots, and I think The Guardian very effectively showed that was as responsible for quashing those rumors as it was for spreading them, all the way up through WikiLeaks and Snowden and everything else. So the key is, though, what do you do with it when you're dealing with thousands or hundreds or tens of, in some cases, tens of millions of records, as in the case of like the Wall Street Journal dealing with Medicare data or Medicaid data. And part of the answer is, narrative. This is what actually we are good at, I hope, I think. It's taking the raw material, it's taking information, it's taking data and turning it into a story. And that is something that, I think that's probably why Snowden and others felt a journalist might be the right home for a data set. That's kind of what we do. Well, it's what we do for a living anyway. The problem is that news organizations often are not the right. Often data sets are very complicated, or the data is very highly scientific, or there's a lot of missing data, or they just don't have the skills in-house to deal with it. I mean, I can remember one incident recently, not that long ago, where we were working with another newsroom that shall remain nameless, and during the initial discussions about the data set, I asked how many records, how big the data set was, and the answer was 65,000 or so. And I said, okay, and what form did you get this? He said, oh, it was an Excel spreadsheet. And I said, is it 65,560 or something like that? Yeah, that's exactly the number. Well, some of you are laughing because you know why. Yeah. Excel 2000, would only import 65,000 records, and it just simply truncate. Actually, there was 280,000 records. Newsrooms need to be better about this. Newsroom needs to, they're good at storytelling, but not necessarily great with data.
Yeah, I think some kind of this consideration running also in your newsroom, right, Guido? And basically you are in a very difficult, maybe, position. You are both a journalist and an activist somehow. We talked about diritto di sapere. So how do you wear, and how comfortably do you wear these two hats at the same time?
Yeah, I must do my coming out. I'm both a journalist and an activist, and at sometimes I do wear the same hat in the same place in the same moment. Posso avere le slide? So I don't go that far. It's not, unfortunately, because this is a great picture. I mean, I think this is a picture of the year, by the way. But anyway, to get to more serious stuff, this is what we did a couple of weeks ago. We ran a couple of weeks ago at Wired. It's a story on asbestos. It's an investigation we did. We've been running for like almost 6 months, and finally it went to print, and then you find it online. This is a long form, and for those who are not familiar with asbestos in Italy, Italy has been the first producer in Europe of asbestos, second only to the Soviet Union, so per capita we've been the highest producers, and the first consumer overall, Soviet Union included. That's more than 80 years of asbestos consumption and production. We have still one of the highest mortality rates for asbestos-related diseases, especially mesothelioma, which is a very ugly death because basically your lungs are shrinking and you suffocate to death. So it's a very ugly story, and it's about 3,000 people who die per year. That's 3 people a day. Sorry, that's eight people a day. That's a lot of people. What we did is actually get data in a very activist way. We were the first to draw this map, which is actually, we made data open, that comes from data that was in the hands of the Ministry of Environment that was never released, and we plotted it, and so you can actually explore this data because it was given to us in a PDF form, and well, we had a very funny conversation with the ministry saying, we only have it in PDF. And we said, well, it's 196 pages. What you do with 196 pages of geo-coordinates in PDF? I mean, it's nonsense. I said, okay, it's right, but the only Excel CSV file is on the researcher's PC, and she's on vacation, so we can't give it to you. So we really got pissed at that point, and we started making access requests. We knew we wouldn't get much else, so we hacked the data. Basically, we did all the access requests just to show that we were legitimately asking for the data, and that we could, argue that the ministry was not giving it to us. What you can do with this map is actually drill down to the street level and see if there's an asbestos contaminated site close to your house. It's a very imperfect work. We've mapped 38,000 sites. Our rough estimate is that there are more than 300,000, so probably we mapped 10% if we were good. But this gives you a glimpse of what it is. We pushed it even further because we wrote up a petition, and this is a petition that when I wrote it, I was really wearing the activist hat. You see, lapsus there. Freud kicks in sometime, but it's a petition that has been signed by more than 2,000 people. Please sign it. Go on our website and sign it. We aim to get to 5,000. So is there a conflict with my journalist role? I argue there's not, because this is what, again, David Gilmer would call maybe an infrastructural activism. His talk yesterday was very good because he just lined up several things he has been saying for years, but in a very powerful way, and said basically, if you're a journalist, you have to be in favor, you have to be an activist on freedom, on individual freedom, on civil rights, because that's what you stand for. That's what freedom of the press stands for. So if you extend that and you're not stretching it, transparency and access to data, access to this kind of, I would say, life-saving information is something that we need to be activists about. So we didn't stop with the petition, though. We wrote reports, and the past year I've been presenting this here. But I'm pointing to this because we didn't stop with. I want to show you that we went even further. We really activists. So Diritto di Sapere, which I co-founded, is one of the 30 organizations supporting the FOIA for Italy. And this morning we presented the first freedom of information text that is actually in Parliament, that has been registered in the databases of the Parliament, and that hopefully before 2016 will become the first Italian freedom of information law. So that's a necessary step.
That's pretty amazing. So in order to go on with this kind of imaginary transition from journalism and activism, and maybe touching a little bit on the political side of this conversation, I would like to ask Costanza a question. Costanza, you are not a journalist, you are an activist, or maybe better to say you are an advocate. What is your experience with radical data so far in your advocacy work, and what are the fields where radical data could make the difference, and why?
All right. Yes, I wouldn't define myself as an activist. I'm more of an advocate or a human rights lobbyist, if you want. So my role is really to transfer contents, data, campaigns from the activists to the decision makers, to frame things so that the decision makers can understand them and do something about them. And my experience so far with radical data is pretty limited. And I say this from the point of view of an organization, which is the Open Society Foundations, which is 1,500 people and one of the biggest budget for human rights work throughout the world. So this is a little bit worrying. But as I was mentioning before, limited experience, I think there are two orders of reasons for that. The first is what I mentioned before. I think that on transparency, accountability, access to information, there is a little bit more experience. So my colleagues dealing with these specific issues have a little bit more experience with radical data and radical data activism. But the second point, at least in my experience, is that when you talk equality, non-discrimination, migration, what works with journalists and politicians is not data, it's emotions. So for instance, the story that I told you before is all about emotions, it's about fear. The story goes to the main newspapers because of fear of the Muslim, but it also goes to politicians. So the day afterwards, the alleged Muslim attack against the Christians, the organization of the municipality in Italy went out, we are not welcoming any asylum seekers in Italy anymore. And similarly, if you take organizations working on migration and human rights, they mainly base their campaign not rather on data, rather that on a sentiment of sympathy, compassion, the poor refugee was coming here, the poor person who risked his life through the sea. And so this is my experience so far. We haven't worked that much through data, apart for a couple of collaboration with tactical texts that were very, very helpful on other issues. But for instance, on the issue, let me just cite this, on the issue, I do migration, but I also do equality. Equality means minorities, ethnic minorities. So in Europe and Italy, I end up working a lot on Roma, which is another topic, which is everything but emotionally treated by both journalists and politicians. So, with Tactical Tech, we did this study, which is, and we did also some graphics about this to show that, for instance, over 8 years, if you have survey data on levels of intolerance vis-a-vis minorities, Italy stands out because it's the country where there is most intolerance against Roma people. And this is pretty, if you think that in Italy Roma are the 0.25% of the population, is 200,000 people, and in Spain and Romania is 10% of the population, knowing that Italy is the country where the anti-Roma sentiment is mostly felt is incredible. Do I have another minute?
Yes.
Oh, great. Now, just in terms of what can we do, in my view, with data in these fields, I wanted to say a couple of things. If you discuss migration, what we are going to try to do with the Italian Civil Liberties Coalition very soon is that we are launching this campaign and appeal, which is called European Protection Now, and you can find it on the website of the Italian Civil Liberties Coalition. And what we are going to do is that we are going to also work on data and not only emotion to put the phenomenon of migration, deaths at sea, but also the alleged invasion of asylum seekers in Italy back into context. Because we are discussing 200,000 people, a little Perugia coming to a 60 million Italy last year only. Can't we really deal with that? With people fleeing war like this? I think we can't. So we're going to do a little bit of fact check on things that politicians say and also put this data back into question.
Yeah, I think there is also feelings and emotion that are arising from data sometimes. So that one thing doesn't exclude the other. But I want, since has been, quoted by Costanza, its Tactical Tech Collective is doing some amazing work, and I want to jump on this, and I have a question for you, Gabi. This ability, this craftsmanship of designing and packaging visual narrative, very complex visual narratives, especially those that are data-based, is in the end right now of a few powerful, I would say, newsroom across the world. However, and is one of the main topics today, activism is increasingly interested in developing effective visual narratives or communication strategy, and even to get some of the professionals that are already involved in this field in journalism on board. To strengthen basically the information element and to persuade better and increase the public engagement. So how can we empower NGOs with the tools, the techniques, and the professionals that are required for crafting effective visual narratives? And if I can attach another question to this, that is very popular for small newsroom. How can we make these effective recipes for these recipes for effective visual storytelling affordable for NGOs? How can we make these recipes for effective visual storytelling affordable for the NGOs?
Right. Aaron was right. It is quite hard to hear. I didn't take him seriously. So I'm going to, is it possible to have the presentation up?
Yeah, if you can, over there. Se possiamo lanciare l'altra presentazione che Gabbia.
So I'm going to try and sum up the challenges that NGOs and activists face in providing visual narratives in about 4 minutes, maybe. Okay. And activists have been making amazing visual narratives for years. However, these are some of the challenges that we've seen over the last 12 years of working in this area. This is a photo of all the images from Flickr over 24 hours. That someone printed out for the big data exhibition in Barcelona. I think they were sponsored by Kodak, so that made it easier. So as you can tell, we're oversaturated by data, information, visuals. People are used to seeing a lot. So for activists and NGOs to stand out and to get people to understand what they're trying to say to them is becoming increasingly competitive. So there's two types I just want to talk about very briefly. The kind of quick, get the idea, okay, I've understood this. So Greenpeace has been really kind of leading this kind of area. You can understand straight away that they're talking about plastic in the ocean. Or the more complicated visualizations, the kind of, I'm sure we've all seen this one, it's one of my favorite, the pitch interactive drone strikes in Pakistan. So on this kind of data visualization that wants people to get the picture, get the detail, understand complicated issues quite quickly, but also being able to delve in further. So ignore this slide for a second. So campaigners and activists see these visualizations and they want to emulate them. And we hold trainings in lots of places, and we've written a book about visualization for advocacy purposes. And the most common problem that we face is activists are lacking capacity to make similar visualizations that they see in the newsrooms, in these big campaigning organizations, because these visualizations cost money, and they take time, and they take skills. You're talking data analysis, you're talking visual artists, coders, and these are things that normal NGOs and activists don't normally have. So when we go to trainings, we usually show these inspiring examples, and then at the end, we're left with a bit of a downer because people are saying, well, how can I make these myself? But what we're trying to encourage is, like Aaron said yesterday, that to be part of a team, and activists and NGOs know their data, know their research the best, and they should be working in a team of programmers, of designers. If you want one person to do that all, then that's great, but that's really rare. And we're trying to encourage people to work together and not have a kind of design down, top down approach, but have activists talk about their research and kind of direct their visualization. And this is because there's a lot of problems with visualizing advocacy subjects. So there are icon problems, there are color problems. People in China, the color red means good luck. In Europe, it usually means danger. We've worked with some designers who may use skulls quite readily, and sometimes it takes an activist to be able to say, hey, I don't want to use skulls, and I don't want to use pink for my gender issue. And only the activists know what's best for their design. There's also some complicated issues around visualizing difficult issue areas. So this is the Google search I did of privacy and what Google images come up for privacy. And as you see, it's padlocks, it's binary codes, it's CCTV cameras. They've kind of found their visual cues, and people have stopped being that inventive, making new ones. But let's say you're trying to visualize a more complicated issue, like female genital mutilation. How would you find the right visual for that? Well, about 8 years ago, Amnesty did this rose example. And this was similar to the Greenpeace, that people would be able to see this and say, oh, okay, this is what it means, without seeing a horrific picture or a bloody razor, which was the usual before. However, lots of people do not like this. They don't like women being seen as roses. They don't like women being seen as delicate, fragrant things. But whether we like it or not, this has become the visual language for this issue. I just did some quick research. Oh, I missed the video, but it's another video of Plan International that, oh, thank you. Okay. And then this just looking on Google Images of FGM campaigners and what logos they're using. So they're using flowers, they're using desert flower or orchid project. So whether we like it or not, what visuals we use are really important to how they determine an issue. There are other capacity problems like safety. So there's a responsible data movement going on that a lot of NGOs are working in. The idea of keeping your data and your sources safe. And also when we talk about tools, so let's say an NGO did want to use a tool, there's lots of out-of-the-box visualization tools available, producing quite everyday results, unfortunately. And so with the question of what I would want and how they would become more affordable, in a perfect world, I would want more open source tools that are really beautiful. There's an open source tool called RAW by a Milan-based organization called Density Design, and it's free for use, and they're not tracking you as far as I know. And that's what I want, more tools, and that's based on D3 library, which is inaccessible for a lot of people. The other thing I just want to mention, if I have time, 1 minute, is the idea of impact. So what's the point in spending the money and doing this? Does it have any impact? And when it comes to affordability, I would want possibly funders to look for different ways of measuring impact, and to also invest in telling data stories for NGOs, so providing more money for people to work with artists and designers, providing more funding for trainings, providing more funding for capacity building, and then not having that related to the number of clicks you're getting. And I'd also like to say, sorry, we work a lot with offline communities. So this is very online, what I'm talking about, but there's a lot of offline communities that have different ways of doing that, and that's a whole host of other problems.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions and to run through the panel, and then I would like to open up the discussion with our audience. And one is about the ethical and legal implication of making data visible. Because by making data visible and publishing it, you can do good, for sure, but you can also do harm. And the data element that shared by some of the stories that we are talking about can be imbued with ethical and legal implications. So I would like to hear from our panelists what's your take on this. Should we start from you, Guido?
I'm very radical on this. I mean, I like to think of ourselves as pretty radical, and I think we are, at least in Italy, because, well, by the way, the data on the asbestos, we've made that the data set public, so you can download it from our website and play with it and do better stuff than what we did. Next month, we're we're publishing another data set. It's, just to give you an idea, it's mortality rates in 1,500 Italian hospitals, pretty much all of Italian hospitals, for 22 causes of death from kidney tumor, lung tumor, heart attack, stroke, etc. This data has never been made public in a detailed way by the Italian government, and you cannot read all the reports online saying why it is so crucial data, because it actually shows in which hospitals people die more and in which they die less. In some hospitals, the death rate is 5 times the national average, so you probably should shut down some hospitals, at least parts of those hospitals, if after 7 years you've been declining an increasing mortality rate. This data has never been made public because I mean, there have been a number of commissions saying no, it would scare people off, and I would want to be scared off if my hospital where my family members or myself might have to go, and I discover it has 5 times the national mortality rate. I would want to get scared, and maybe I would also get angry and start questioning my, local administrator, saying, "What are you doing with the money we're paying for taxes?" Because in Italy, 80% of the regional budget is for the health system. We got a great health system. It's the second best in the world after France, according to WHO. But still, I mean, some places are not that great, and we want to know it. So in that sense, do it. Of course, it's very different when you have individual data and you can harm somebody. You have, I mean, name, last name. Sometimes we get like phone numbers and like very personal information in the data we get, and of course that stuff you redacted.
Right, so I'm starting exactly from that stuff, because I guess my example is going to be even more radical than yours. No, well, I'm dealing exactly with sensitive data and things of this kind. So my example is related to equality and non-discrimination. In my work in Brussels and also at the national level, we advocate for non-discrimination and equality for all. And when we advocate for non-discrimination, we mainly deal with racial and ethnic minorities. I mean, that's my field. And racial and ethnic minorities in Europe, differently from Anglo-Saxon countries, do not have data to rely on in order to demonstrate that they are much more discriminated than other groups simply because we don't know how many blacks there are in continental Europe, we don't know how many Roma there are in Europe. Well, we have a number, but it's not very accurate, etc., etc. So in our advocacy at Open Society, we are holding this position that these data are important too, and that there is a safe, respectful, and inclusive way of collecting this data and use them for advocacy purposes and for informing policy making as well. And the interesting bit of it is that over the past 5 years, I've been going around in Europe and trying to understand what groups at risk of discrimination, Roma, Jews, African, Muslims, think about this. And to my great, great, great surprise, in countries like Germany and France, where talking ethnic origin or racial origin is absolutely taboo because of the Holocaust experience, well, the black German community and the Swedish Muslim community and the black French community, they say, you know what, if we are involved, if you anonymize the data, if you tell us what use of the data you want to do, we are in. We want to know to what extent we are active in the job market. We want to know to what extent our daughters and sons are going to the best top universities in France, or whether we are segregated into the difficult schools. So that's a very, very critical thing to discuss ethnic data in Europe, but I think we should, and there is a way.
I think you could say a lot about, for instance, the huge row that was around the publishing of the NSA in The Guardian as well, about the fact that that data could really harm it was this big, row in the UK. Yeah, about the fact that you can...
down at this end of the table, we are having an extraordinarily difficult time hearing that end of the table, so...
So it's just about the fact that you can really do harm by publishing data, that's the question.
Yeah, so, I mean, I've already talked about the example that I would say, which is WikiLeaks, where I think we made the decision to publish only a portion of the data. Whether or not that was the right decision, I think then I would have defended it. Now, I don't know that I feel that we actually served the public particularly well. I think there is enormous value in publishing. I mean, obviously you have to be responsible, and I do think a certain amount of redaction is responsible, but I think we should have published as much of that data as we possibly could have, and I think that was actually a failure. In terms of related to this question, though, is journalism itself is not necessarily, journalists are great at the story, not so great at a story, if you know what I mean. Journalists have a fairly short attention span when it comes to stories, and that's a huge difference between a journalism organization and an advocacy organization. So in this sense, I guess what I'd like to see is this question actually framed a little differently, where how could we actually do this better? And one way we could do this better is to work a little more symbiotically. An organization, we're working on a project now that I can't really talk about. I can't tell you when it's going to happen or if it's going to happen, but it's really exciting. And that project would involve. You're going to have to.
Thank you very much.
You're going to trust me on that? No. It's really exciting. And we would be creating a data set that currently doesn't exist on a topic that is really important. And so the way this would happen is we as the journalism organization would have that very short attention span of a story or a set of stories or a line of reporting, and then it would be done. But in partnering with a university, that university organization that we partner with, and I can't tell you the university or the data set or the story, would then carry on, with that data set in the future. I think that is a kind of relationship that could exist between, advocacy organizations and newsrooms much more than they exist right now. So I guess that's what I would like to see.
Very good point. Gabi, let me go back to Mariana. Mariana, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Would you like to express yourself on this topic?
So right now, as Fusion is 1 year old and a very baby company, we rely a lot on ABC, Disney, and Univision. So everything we do has to go through legal, as in the other newspapers, but it's specifically intense on paying attention of what we share. We are pretty open with all migration and minority report. We try to get as much data as we can to report inequalities and to speak in the words of the unspoken ones. So, but we are really limited, and we are still trying to test the waters in what we can do or not. We do lots of FIRE requests, and we are trying to integrate that process inside the newsroom, and hopefully we're going to be towards opening as much as we can, taking in consideration our big legacy mother companies.
So Tactical Tech began in 2003 primarily as an open source NGO that wanted to promote openness within the activism world, which primarily saw it through technology, but we're now moving into obviously open data. With a lot of the organizations that we work with, the activists that we work with, we try and provide a data set with every visualization that we create so that people can then download it, have a look through it themselves, ask their own questions. But I think it has to be taken with a huge caveat of responsible data. And I would suggest anyone who's interested in this area to look at the Engine Room and all of their affiliates for their resource, because it's by far, I think for the NGO world, the best thing that we have so far. And I think when you're talking to sources and you're interviewing people, I think the case for de-anonymizing them can happen often, and I think people should be more aware of how easy it is to, am I saying de-anonymize right? To see who they are. And I think that it's really easy to do this, and especially in this kind of post-Snowden world that we live in, and we can see how easy it is to connect those dots together. And I think even if you think that you've anonymized your data, you may not have. So I think that's mainly what I wanted to say.
Right, thank you very much. And one last question that is for Aaron, but is for all the others as well. The Guardian promoted and launched the climate change campaign, Keep It Into the Ground, in order to divest from the world's most polluting companies. And in your keynote, Aaron, you said that since you are at the Guardian, you had the chance to go beyond reporting what the world is like, to say also how the world should be. And you described this as a liberating experience. And the identity of the Guardian has been defined for a long time by a kind of mantra, the whole picture. Does it mean that in order to really get the whole picture, we as journalists and readers need to get into the picture?
Yes, but very selectively and very, very carefully. You know, as a, whatever you want to call it, mainstream legacy news organization, one of the things that we have going for us is history, long history. People know who you are, they trust you. I mean, you have that. The quickest way to lose that trust is to basically sell it and bank on it, and we don't want to do that. We want to be very careful that the campaigns that we get into, the campaigns we're involved with, fit our mission, fit our values, and I think, you know, Keep It in the Ground is a perfect example of one that does. That is, by the way, a very data-driven campaign. A big chunk of the work we did on it was analyzing a lot of where these organizations in particular, not just Gates and Wellcome, where they're invested, determining the amount of investment an organization has in fossil fuels is a very, very difficult thing to do. There are huge parts of that that are all, that are driven by data. This is an example, I think, where you can see a bit of activism and journalism coming together in a way that I think leads to a positive, in my opinion, it would be a positive outcome, even if Gates and Wellcome don't divest. The important step that this campaign does, I mean, from the point of view of an American, who is seeing this who's involved in something like this for the very first time in a newsroom, and I describe this as being kind of liberating, actually, is if we're finally, able as journalists to say, yes, here is a problem, this is a big problem, here's the scope of the problem, let us tell you all kinds of things about this problem, and here is something you can do. Here's how you can get involved. And that's maybe the most frustrating thing as a journalist for 20-some years, was not being able, getting to that point, seeing the door in front of you and just saying, oh, I don't know. It's up to you now. You guys figure this out. But I do want to stress that you have to do it very carefully, you have to do it very thoughtfully, and you have to do it in ways that don't put you or your organization at risk.
It's a very good point. Anyone wants to add anything to this? Okay, so no? So, do you want to say something? Gabi? No? Okay, so I think this kind of consideration wraps up everything pretty well. So I would like to open the question to the public if anyone has. Well, we touched so many points, and I don't know if there are questions. Anyone?
Questions?
Questions?
Oh, come on, nobody? Wow.
Well, that means that we have
what
been...
Can I add something, if I may, if there's no questions?
Yes, of course.
It's very quick news. It's just baked out. So picking on the topic of NGOs not having the resources of visual storytelling, the tools and the money to invest in visual artists, I'm very happy to say that there is a need from NGOs, and there is an offer from journalism and newsrooms who don't have access to be exposed to the entire world, like in Latin America. And so Chicas Poderosas is going to partner with the United Nations to help newsrooms of Latin America to help tell stories such as women and girls getting pregnant at the age of 12 and 13 that decreases the wealth of a country. So we're going to partner up journalists with United Nations to help both sides. So United Nations will have the tools for storytelling, the stories that are important to address these issues. So here I think it's a perfect example of journalism meeting activism, meeting NGO, and I'll let you know we have stories coming out of this partnership.
Well, that is massive for Chicas Poderosas. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
So if there is a question over there, yeah.
What about reporting on the activists themselves? If the journalists are collaborating with them? Oh, so sorry.
It's quite. I just said a quick note. Aaron was very, very smart in taking the headphone actually, because it's very difficult to get the right sound here on this side. So if you can, speak slowly.
Okay, I'll do my best. What about reporting on the activists themselves? If journalists begins to work with them, to collaborate with them, and if they discover that something is wrong with their fight or with their methods or with the action on the ground, the journalists will put themselves in a difficult spot, in a difficult situation. Will they be able to criticize, to keep the right distance with this world universe? Even if they fight for the right, they can be wrong sometimes.
That's a great question.
What's the question? Who's the question for?
Is that for anybody? Was that for somebody in particular? No, anyone. All right, well, I'll just jump in, because, again, WikiLeaks, right? So every news organization that was involved with WikiLeaks took a different approach. Some news organizations worked very closely with WikiLeaks. Others, like the New York Times, kept WikiLeaks very much at arm's length. I mean, very publicly, and much to their frustration. And for that exact reason. I'm not sure what the right answer is again, but that's a significant risk. It's also a risk in the inverse. News organizations have and are frequently wrong, have been and are frequently wrong. News organizations have been and are frequently irresponsible. And so news organizations have not a great track record of protecting sources all the time. So, it's a risk, I think, on both sides, to be very honest with you. So, it's a very good question. It's a big issue. But I think the risk actually exists going both ways.
Anyone else? Yeah, sure.
I wanted to say something to that, because I understand your point of view, and it's also something that I ask myself when we ask journalists to collaborate with that to report on specific phenomena rather than others. And I mean, for me, my reply is that, of course, as a journalist, you need to be independent, absolutely, et cetera, but as in every social activity, you've got your point of view, and your point of view is going to influence you as a journalist in whatever you do. So as a journalist, it's known that you are collaborating with an NGO. You are simply making your point of view clearer, and in some way you are even more transparent than if you were alleging that you are only doing your work as independent journalist on that specific topic. So I think there are ways to overcome this.
You want me to say something about this? Or? Well, I see no hands, so I'll give my line on this one too. I think there's no definite answer on this one. It's really a case-by-case thing. We happen to work even on the asbestos story with associations. And it's a great relationship because you get access to things and to places and to people you could not. I mean, it would take you ages as a journalist, and for a small team like ours, it's just essential, I would say. At the same time, yeah, the risk goes both ways, and I think in that sense, you have to try and really understand who is in front of you, both if you're an activist and you're facing a journalist, and if you're a journalist and you're facing an activist. And you have to understand from the very beginning if you can, forgive me the word, but make a clean deal with them. Tell them, look, you got your agenda, I know it. You have to be open and transparent about it. And I have my agenda, and what I publish is what I will publish. But are you going to live with this? And at the same time, as a journalist, because in the end, when I run the story, I think as a journalist, I go to press and I'm liable as a journalist. I really have to check thoroughly on the data, on whatever, on the storytelling, on the facts. And we spoke a lot about data and visualization here, but there's a storytelling in the equation, and there's people, if you look again at our asbestos stories, there are lots of people that we interviewed, we talked to them, we told the story of their communities. You gotta treat them as sources and vet them.
Another question there? Yes? Oh, it's two.
Ladies first.
I had a question about, okay, so basically I'm a little fuzzy for me personally about the line between kind of explanatory journalism and solution journalism. Because, ProPublica, in a talk they said their mission is to, I'm going to sanitize this a bit, who's getting screwed, who's doing the screwing, and how can it be stopped? And I think it's that last bit, the how can it be stopped, and telling people to stop it is where it gets really squishy. And I think now that breaking news is sort of, it's Twitter, it's Facebook, and journalists have to do more explanatory reporting, that's kind of getting towards, well, they also then need to be explaining what the potential solutions are. So my question is, are your media outlets like rewriting their editorial policies? Are they like inching closer to, we need to provide context and explanation because that's our role as journalists, and we want people to keep buying our content, and it has to have some sort of value added, like showing what the steps towards change might look like? And yeah, so what does that conversation in the newsroom look like? And are you as far as ProPublica is saying, yes, we want to show how to get people to stop screwing over these, the topic of our story. So I'd like to know what the editorial conversation around that is in the newsrooms.
Who does like to take this?
Okay. Go ahead. I'm still thinking about the answer.
Oh, I'll take a crack at that. I wouldn't, it's interesting you bring up ProPublica. I would not necessarily put ProPublica in the category of, activist, not even close. In fact, I think ProPublica, they are an amazing news organization on a lot of different fronts. I think they're very traditional in their approach to, traditional from the, American sense of, journalism. So I'm not sure I would qualify that, I would use them as an example. But I totally understand the question. Right now, where I work now, things we're doing would never fly at the New York Times. Like, we would never do a campaign at the New York Times. We would never, the solutions journalism thing, the Times has been very careful not to go down that road, and that's their decision. I think The Guardian is a little different in that way. And The Guardian is willing to go down this sort of solutions road. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. But I wouldn't say that that's, completely out of character for The Guardian. Certainly not for The Guardian. And I'm not sure that's out of character for many news organizations outside the U.S. The U.S. is actually the outlier in this respect. Many news organizations outside the U.S. are much more, feel much freer to mix opinion and news in ways that an American news organization wouldn't. So I wouldn't say that what The Guardian's doing right now is in any way different than, say, our previous campaign around female genital mutilation or the many campaigns The Guardian's run over the years. So I think it's pretty much kind of it's part of our mission.
Great. One last question over there. No? It's all right.
Can I jump? Can I jump?
Yes.
Very fast. Okay. Being a U.S. company, we are in that group that tries to aim for the solution. I can give you a very straightforward example. For example, we did a project on transgender detainees. So when people run away from Mexico and from other Latin American countries to the US, they get into detention centers. And these US detention centers have a certain number of cases they have to arrest per night. And of course, the victims would be minorities, including transgenders. And as the rules of how to detain a person is which gender was this person when he or she was born. So women, transgender, get arrested in cells with men. And of course, this leads to rape and abuse and even death. So doing this kind of activist projects where we have in first person stories, we try to aim to change policies. So with this specific story, we try to change this law of having a certain number of detentions per night and changing the law of how to arrest a person by gender when he or she was born.
Constanze, you want to add something?
Yeah. Just want to add a point on this. We are discussing journalism and the degree to which you can get involved and also get your public oriented towards solutions. But this is not, I mean, this issue, this question exists not only for journalists. Think about academics and about lawyers. NGOs, for their campaigns, rely not only on comms, but also on research and also on strategic litigation to some extent. And these professionals who have a very similar oath, in a sense, to you as journalists, are also struggling into being embedded observers or research activists and being pure rational choice, neutral observers of reality. And the truth is that we are dealing with a spectrum, and there must be a degree of I guess, flexibility and consciousness about what you do. So I don't think that you can take off the table any option. You just need to do things that you do, knowing that you are taking that approach. If you're a journalist, a lawyer representing somebody into a court, or an academic writing a phenomenon and maybe adding up some policy prescription to your piece.
Great. I think we touched so many different elements. We went through quite a thoroughly, quite a broad range of elements around this discussion. We tried really to touch the problems from different perspectives, and I think the time that we have is over. So I thank you very much for your participation. That was very, very good, and thank you very much for your time and for your attention. So.